What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and my patrons voted, and it's Tuesday, so it's time to give you my top 10 Underdark monsters. So different from the other ones we've done in the past, rather than just doing 5e, I'm going to do all editions. So really, if you know me, this will be 3.5 and 5e. But they're just monsters that are relevant and live in the Underdark. They don't necessarily need, in my mind, to be published in 5th edition, because honestly, a lot of the cooler Underdark monsters are from older editions. We only have a good sampling in this one. So before I dive into that, though, I did want to say, hey, you know, the channel's been growing constantly every day, and that's thanks to all of you. But if you're watching this and you're not subscribed to the channel and you like what I do here, please consider subscribing. I know I put out a lot of content, so sometimes it hits your suggested page multiple times on YouTube, and you just see it so often that you don't know that, hey, you're not subscribed. And, you know, it helps me and it helps the channel. So if you do that, I'd appreciate it. So let's dive in. If you happen to like the Underdark, which I'm assuming you did because you clicked on this video, this coming Saturday, the 17th of April at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll actually be running a 4-ish hour session that's going to be in the Underdark. Our Rise of Tiamat campaign ended a year or more ago, and we've done continuing one-shots to tie up loose ends and see where the characters are. And one of the characters, who happens to be played by Celeste Conowitch of the Venture Maidens and now currently running Venture Maidens Campaign Guide Kickstarter, it's her character, and her character's father was stolen by Drow, and I've already teased that there's mind flayers involved. So some, if not all, of these characters will appear probably, or all these creatures will appear in some aspect or not in this. But if you want to see how I run a homebrew Underdark-based adventure, one-shot, with Drow and mind flayers, you'll want to come and check that out. So we hope to see you on Twitch this Saturday night. Number 10. The Elder Brain. If you know anything about me, you know that I love mind flayers and aberrations in general, so the Elder Brain's sort of the Big Mac Daddy of all of them. And here it is. So this came to us in Volo's Guide to Monsters, and it basically, if you want to run a true mind flayer encounter, well, you got to have an Elder Brain. That's just how it goes. So, I'm not going to dive too much into the specifics here for all of these, because some of them, again, aren't 5th edition, but they're basically the central intelligence hub of a mind flayer community, and as such, they have abilities that sort of dictate what you can do and have communications and ability to extend the range of mind flayers' telepathy. They can also make physical attacks, right? They do have tentacles, a standard mind flayer mind blast, and then they also have legendary actions that are associated, right? They're a legendary creature, tentacle attacks, breaking concentrations on people's spells, which is pretty cool. And what's really neat is it doesn't cause a saving throw. You just break it, and it deals psychic damage, which is something we don't really see on a lot of creatures. And while it's ridiculously frustrating to have that happen, it would be a really cool thing to adopt in other aspects for other creatures as well. You can do a pulse, and then again, sever psychic links if need be. And then there's layer actions associated with it. If we zoom in a little bit here, you'll be able to see him a little bit better, because it's a creature of that. Plus, it also, Elder Brain reminds me of Mother Brain from the Metroid series, and I'm a huge fan of Metroid, so it really just pushes all the right buttons for me. Number 9. The Neothelid. I covered this in my top 10 aberrations, so I won't dive into it too much, but the lore on these creatures is amazing. We all know that to create more mind flayers, one undergoes the process known as ceremorphosis, where a tiny little tadpole taken from the pool of the Elder Brain is placed into the eye of an unsuspecting creature, or suspecting, I guess, if you're held in against your will. You really, play Baldur's Gate 3, you'll see. But it basically transforms you into a mind flayer. Well, what happens if one of those little tadpoles grows to full size, it becomes a Neothelid, right? And that's usually what happens when adventurers eradicate a mind flayer colony, eradicate the Elder Brain, and then don't know that you need to kill all of the tadpoles, because they'll vie for superiority, and eventually one tadpole will win, having defeated all of the other tadpoles. And then as time goes on, it grows into this gargantuan, underground, terrifying tentacled worm that spews acid, can float, has spells and telekinesis, and it terrifies the Elder Brain and the Mind Flayer communities because it's not intelligent enough to be affected by typical Mind Flayer tactics. They're awesome. You can see in the picture here the scale of a player character. You know what I want? I really desperately want a mini for like a nice Neothelid mini from WizKids. I think would be awesome. They're really cool. It's a different encounter that you can throw if you want to deal something Mind Flayer adjacent. I really like them. Number 8. I promise you they're not all worms, but the next one here is the purple worm. I've said it before in other videos, I like burrowing creatures. I like tremors and graboids, so these kind of push, again, check all the right boxes for me. And there's a really sweet purple worm mini that came from WizKids, and they're just awesome. A big terrifying underground monster that can come up and deal a ridiculous amount of damage, swallow you whole, which is always a fun encounter. As long as you don't overdo it, the swallow hole mechanic and having to break people out is always interesting. They have the big tail stinger, which can do a ton of damage. Also potentially get you access to purple worm poison as an attack, as a poison that you can use, which is devastating to use. It does a ton of damage if you're able to get it. And it can make, tunnels, which is pretty cool. And if you haven't played or at least read Out of the Abyss, there's a really good encounter section in Out of the Abyss where it basically goes over a whole like purple worm hive and eggs and stealing purple worm eggs. It's a really good encounter. I definitely like it. They're really cool. I don't know what more there is to say. Number 7. I also promise that I won't just be regurgitating everything that was in my top 10 aberrations video. There's some other interesting stuff coming up. But the Aboleth, right? Again, another otherworldly ancient being with a ton of amazing lore. There's a lot of stuff here. Not really in the monster manual, but if you dive back into older editions or just look on YouTube, right? Mr. Rex, Jordan, AJ Pickett, I feel like they've all covered Aboleth in some aspect. And there's definitely a lot worth looking into. You could run an entire campaign just dealing with Aboleths and Abolithic society and the history there, and it would be varied and new, right? Aboleths exist, at least in Faerun anyway, before the gods. They remember times before the gods exist. They had this crazy ancient society. Plus, they have all these awesome abilities, right? If you've played Tomb of Annihilation, there's a really memorable Aboleth in Tomb of Annihilation. They've got telepathy. They've got their tentacle attack. They've got mind control powers. If you get hit with their mucus, it can turn your skin translucent, make it so you can only breathe underwater. They can psychically drain you and then gain hit points from you. They have lair actions because they are a legendary creature. And then like if it communicates with you, it just learns your desires and stuff. They are a really good, hyper intelligent being. This could easily be a big bad evil guy for a campaign, or could be what I think is more interesting is the puppet master pulling the strings of what the party thought was the big bad evil guy. Aboleths are awesome. I like them a lot. And if you look around, there's some interesting homebrew stuff that you can find for other types of Aboleths. I think even Cobalt Press has an undead Aboleth, which I really, really like in the Tome of Beasts. Again, I like them a lot. They're awesome. Definitely check them out. Number 6. The Basilisk. And while I realize that I guess apparently in 5e they're more mountainous, I'm talking more about the Abyssal Greater Basilisk from back in 3.5. So if we go ahead and take a look right here, you can see that back in 3.5, there was 2 versions, the regular and the Abyssal Greater. And I just want to more or less show you the image of the Abyssal Greater Basilisk. Look at this guy. This thing is terrifying. And it just looks like it belongs in like the shadowy, scary parts of the Underdark. As far as what it did, it wasn't too much different than the standard Basilisk, right? It was just significantly stronger. You can see the DC for the petrification was a 13 for the standard, and then jumped up to a 21 for the Abyssal Greater. And it became basically more like a fiend type creature than, or maybe even possibly an aberration rather than like a monstrosity. So it got resistances, and it eventually even got like a smiting good ability. That's not something we have in 5e, but essentially had a way to deal extra damage. And it was just a stronger, beefier, more scary looking Basilisk. Number 5. The next one is from 3.5 as well. It's from the Forgotten Realms book Underdark, which you can get on the DM's Guild right now, and you can go get a PDF. It'll be high quality. And that is a specific type of Kuo-Toa, and it is the Kuo-Toa Leviathan. And I really like these because I love this image of these people in a rowboat, like in the Underdark, and there's just this massive Kuo-Toa erupting up out of the water, uplifting their boat and like fighting them. It is basically just what it looks like, a giant or a huge size Kuo-Toa. It doesn't really have anything too crazy as far as its abilities. It's very much a martial, kind of brawler type. But if we take a look through some of its different abilities, I think it was kind of the the lore behind it, that it's essentially like this blessed giant version of a standard like Kuo-Toa whip. So it says they're created from exceptionally gifted monitors or whips. These are sort of the priests or the holy types of the Kuo-Toa who worship the Kuo-Toan god Blibdoolpoolp, I guess. Blibdoolpoolp. They venerate and respect Leviathans, and many dream of attaining such high regard in the Sea Mother's eyes. And you can see one of its abilities was the Sea Mother Blessing. And then again, it had things just like the ability to swallow whole, and it can stun people. Basically, it was like a giant Hulk type monster. And here's, you can see the Sea Mother's Blessing. You just it basically got unarmored defense. But the nice thing is, again, with a lot of these 3.5 stuff, if you look hard enough, there's easy analogies, or it's analogous things you can make to have these creatures in 5e. And I was actually kind of surprised this one didn't appear in one of the different books, but I really like it. I think it's a good idea to just if people have been fighting Kuo-Toa, they're, more or less like any other lower level creature you might encounter, orcs, drow, what have you. But this thing is giant, and it can have a very Jaws-like encounter where it pops up, or like a Godzilla kind of a thing. You can make it even bigger if you wanted. I don't know. I always thought this just stuck with me over the years, and I really wanted to put it in here. Number 4. I've talked about countless times how I love Flumphs, so given the fact that their primary domain is the Underdark, I could not include Flumphs on this list. They are, again, wholly different from everything we've talked about, which are more often than not evil or just mindless killing machines, and the Flumph is the lawful good kind of, floaty jellyfish being of the Underdark. And again, I've talked about it before. They basically harmlessly feed off of psionic or telepathic energy from creatures nearby, so they can usually find themselves in areas around things like mind flayers or other things. They can communicate via telepathy. And it's funny enough, they're actually vulnerable to psychic damage. And they have their little tendrils, which function very much like a jellyfish sting. They sting, they deal acid damage, and they can spray you with stinky spray stuff similar to a skunk. But usually they're super nice, and they'll follow the party around and provide nothing but useful information. And they are, pretty intelligent and wise, and they kind of have their little foof. I think that's how the sound of the air coming out of their jets to help them float like a jellyfish makes a sort of foof sound, and that's where the name came from. I love them. Any chance I get to throw them in a game, I do so. You can have a lot of fun with it. Number 3. The Annihilator. We once again find ourselves in 3.5 in the Underdark book that I was mentioning before. And again, I'll have a link, a DM's Guild affiliate link for this and another book that I'll be using in the description. So if you go and pick those up from the DM's Guild, a small piece comes back to me if you're kind enough to use that link. But you might look at this and say, well, that looks oddly familiar. Isn't that a rust monster? Well, you'd be sort of half right. The Annihilator is the Underdark twisted, darker version of the rust monster, and that instead of disintegrating rust with their antennae, they disintegrate creatures. That's right. They touch you with those and you start to disintegrate. So it says, and it even seems to derive sustenance and pleasure from destroying things, especially living creatures. They are medium sized, which I think puts them, significantly larger than one size larger than a rust monster. And you can see right here they have disintegration, a touch attack by one of their antennae. So touching you with an antennae basically subjects you to the equivalency of the disintegrate spell. And if you fail, you take the damage. Or if you fail, you take damage instead of disintegrating. This is 3/5. Disintegration was a little bit different, but yeah, I don't know. I think that could be a very interesting thing because your players are probably familiar with the concept of a rust monster. And if you describe this in such a way, a sort of chitinous insectoid creature with long flowing antenna from the top of its head, dark purple color, 4 tendrils, and it's very clear that even the description is a pale rust monster, perhaps a mutation of some kind, sports an extra pair of antennae protruding from its head. In the place where its mouth should be, there's only smooth skin. So yeah, it's the people version of a rust monster, which is, again, for your average Joe who might not know about this, you could easily lead them to believe they're fighting a rust monster, and then they find out the hard way it's anything but. Number 2. So for this, we are going to another 3/5 book. This is Drow of the Underdark. Again, if you are going to run any kind of Underdark campaign or have Underdark encounters in your game, I highly recommend, in addition to Out of the Abyss, because it provides 5e stuff for it, you pick up the Forgotten Realms Underdark book, as well as the Drow of the Underdark. They are 3 great resources. I know there's a bunch from older editions, but these are the ones that I know, having been a 3/5 guy. So we're talking about deep dragons. We can see that if we scroll ahead 2 pages, they are sort of almost like black, almost purple, sinewy, serpentine-looking dragons. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of the background right here. So it says, this dragon is sinuous and serpentine with a slender neck and limbs and narrow wings. Its scales gleam with deep purple luster of amethyst. Its sleek, narrow head has a streamlined, shielded crest that reaches to its neck. And it says that they kind of often work with drow. And there's also another version here, a Phaseroth, which is, it says, it's a rich purple color tending to black as a particular narrow profile. Tawny crystal orbits its head and its claws glimmer with arcane power. This is a specific type of dragon that moves to a nearby drow city. Has its, it says, or maybe this is a specific one. His new lair is a hidden cavern. Oh yeah, that's a specific deep dragon. And I thought it would be interesting, right? You can see all the crazy abilities that the dragons used to have back in 3.5. But I thought what would be interesting is because they used to have a section for every monster that would provide you lore you could get with different checks, we could read the lore and that would give you kind of a quick insight as to what a player character could discern without any deep knowledge, right? It is a deep dragon native to the Underdark. This result reveals all of its traits. Deep dragons are immune to charm effects and resistant to cold and fire. A deep dragon's breath weapon is a cone of flesh-destroying acid. Deep dragons often work with drow, but they pursue their own hidden agenda and might just as easily be on the opposite side. They covet ancient lore and treasure from the deeps of the earth. We can see here's the stat block of that specific one we were just talking about. Right, we can see he had a bunch of spells. His breath weapon, yeah, it was a 40-foot cone that did acid damage. And they also had shape-changing abilities as well. Very cool. They're just another one of those dragons that you don't hear a ton about, and I'd love to see them. I'm surprised, honestly, that they haven't come back in 5e in some capacity. If we do end up getting Dragonlance, well, I don't know how Underdark ties specifically into Dragonlance. If that's going to be a resource that gives us new dragons, maybe deep dragons will be in there. Number 1. Vrill. I've talked about Vrill before. They are a weird sort of Noivern-like bat goblinoid creature from the Underdark. I think they're pretty awesome. They're purple. They have tiger stripes. It's a pretty crazy looking creature. All right, it says dark violet skin with black tiger stripes, dull yellow eyes, bat-like face, pointed ears, wide mouth. And basically, they are in a similar vein to how like Dwergar were dwarves twisted by mind flayers, and an owlbear is a crazy wizards experimentation. This is basically dark elf or drow wizards experimenting on a bunch of goblinoids, and Vrill are the sort of the final genesis of that. If we keep scrolling, we can see that they do have character abilities here, which I think would be a really awesome race to adapt in 5e, because it basically, you could use, you know, a variety of different templates, but you could see they were basically small size, they have dark vision, possibly give them resistance to thunder damage, and then they could have maybe a bonus to climbing speed, and then they had this, what is it called, skin shift and shriek. So fun fact, the entire stat block for the Vrill, basically everything you need to know how to use them in your game, was just completely left out of that book. And apparently not updated even in the D&D Beyond PDF. You need to go to the Wizards of the Coast archive and find it here on their old website from back in 2007. You can actually get the full stat block. So to see what skin shift, I forgot, is basically rage, barbarian rage. And because again, they were a higher level, like if you were to choose this race, you basically would start off with rage, and then you'd get additional rage uses as you leveled up. And their shriek ability was either, it had two versions. There was a cone, a 30-foot cone, or a 15-foot burst from around you. And it started off pretty mild, right? It only did a d6, you know, sonic damage or thunder damage. And then it would level up with you, right? So it was 2d6 at, or sorry, a d6 at 3rd level, 2d6 at 6th level, 3d6 at 9th level, and so on, up to a maximum of 4d6 at 12th level. So it never got beyond that. So that's what skin shift and shriek are. A little bit of thunder damage, basically scale it like a cantrip is how I would do it. And then maybe you tap into the barbarian rage once a long rest. I think they're awesome, and I would love to adapt them to 5e, and I may be doing so. So there you go, folks. That is my top 10 Underdark monsters. I tried something a little bit different, I feel. I didn't dive too much into the stat blocks like I typically do when I do a monster video. I sort of really go through at a pretty decent extent and explain what all the different abilities are and why I like them. I feel like this falls more into the traditional top 10 where folks give you stuff pretty rapid fire and don't spend a lot of time on things. Now, maybe that's just my perspective because I felt like I was talking fast, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. I know it's kind of polarizing. Some people like the longer form content where I really truly give you a full reason as to why I like or dislike something. And other people just want to get the information. I figured because this was just not like Underdark Monsters in 5e, it was just Underdark Monsters, I could span the whole different areas. And then again, I'm not going to start explaining full 3-5 stat blocks to everybody when they're only to be playing 5e, so I could just talk about the monster for why I like it and kind of some of the interesting bits about it. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel and voting for this. So it was pretty neck and neck with top 10 D&D 5e beasts. This just outweighed it. But if you don't want to see top 10 5e beasts next week, there's still plenty of time for you to go over and join the Patreon if you'd like. You know, if you're in a position to do so, and you could vote and still change that because I won't be making top 10 5e beasts till next week. So if the numbers shift, then we might have an opportunity to do something else instead. Thank you again to everybody for watching. If you like what I do here, like this kind of content or the variety of other content that I put out, please consider subscribing to the channel. And you know what? If you feel like giving this video a thumbs up, that always just helps the algorithm and helps get things out in front of people. So again, always looking for top 10 suggestions. Feel free to leave them in the description below. I add them to my master list for my patrons to vote on. I will see you all next time.